Hi guys, thanks for the waiting. Well, this is part 9 of What If Kamen Rider Para DX was in RWBY. So let's start. Chapter 16, A Dusty Old Crow. Third person POV dash. For how long she stared at her bondmate, looking for any sign that he was lying or going to burst out and say surprised, I was joking, Yang couldn't tell. All she knew was that his face had a solemn sense of regret, as if he were delivering news that her sister had passed away unexpectedly. She had no idea when or why, but she eventually started to chuckle. Her chuckling gave way to an odd laughter that grew more manic by the second but then slowed down as she noticed no one was laughing with her. She simply looked to everyone around her before asking, he's serious, isn't he? He's telling the truth? At Ajban's nod, the blonde brawler glared at the dichromatic young man and was about to demand why he hid this from her sister, and everyone else until she was interrupted when Crow put a hand on her shoulder, firmly gripping it as he pointed her attention to him. You need to calm down, firecracker, Crow said in a warning tone, otherwise, you're likely going to repeat what happened when you thought it was a good idea to take a toddler to a shed out in a grim-infested forest. Her face immediately turned ashamed before she looked back to her bondmate apologetically. I already know what happened, Crow said simply, without a trace of lying in his voice, you were simply looking for your mother. You put yourself and Ruby's life at risk because you used up all your energy just to get there, but I can understand why you did it. Her eyes went wide in surprise at hearing this. Only her uncle, dad, and sister knew about that. She looked at Crow, who shook his head before saying, sorry, but I didn't tell him. Turns out Ajban was telling the truth after all. Indeed, Ajban interjected, drinking from his mug for a moment before speaking, Crow comes from an alternate reality, one where the world of Remnant is nothing more than a web show, was it? At Crow's nod, the headmaster resumed his exposition. Because of this, he has seen events that have yet to transpire as well as events that would have happened had it not been for his interference. I also know things that are currently happening right now and events that will happen in the immediate future. The Aunt Faunus spoke in a matter-of-fact tone. I also know, to some extent, why your mother left. Yang's eyes went wide at this and was ready to have him tell her when a thought hit her. She knew that he knew events that would have happened. But does that mean it would be safe to even talk about things like that? With that, she shook her head before saying, you know what? I don't care. I don't care why she left. I just want to find her and talk with her, get to know her even a little. Good luck with that, not trying to be rude or anything, but you're the very reason she left, though not intentionally, Crow said as he held up a hand to stop whatever comment she was about to make. What I mean is, it's some arse-backwards tradition from her in Crow's old village that she still abides by. She's not really supposed to be in contact with you until she feels you're strong enough to survive on your own. If your life needs to be saved, she will only do so once and that's it. Once she catches wind that you're looking for her, if she hasn't already, she's going to make sure you never find her, but she'll always be able to find you. This news shocked all, though Ajban didn't show it as he simply stared at Crow, but Crow was simply stared at the midget as he pulled his flask out before popping it open and gulping down some of its contents. Glinda merely glared at the man before turning her attention to Yang in concern for the young student. Said student's expression was blank and emotionless even as she sighed, but Crow could feel she was hurt at hearing this. It wasn't the answer she was wanting or hoping for, but she finally had it. What she does with it now, though, was another story. Still, something was bothering her, quite a few things, in fact. I wonder, she thought to herself, does this mean that gadget of his came from his reality as well? And what does happen in the future? Soon enough, she realized that everyone was eyeing her expectantly before she spoke. Look, I understand you're worried. But I finally have an answer. It's not a good answer, but it's more than enough for me to stop looking for her. She looked back at Crow in curiosity as she asked, still, what does happen in the future? And did that gizmo of yours come from your reality or something? The GGD. The Aunt Faunus corrected, and no, it did not come from my reality, but rather another one born from a TV show. So a Kamen Rider is supposed to be fake to you as well, huh? And you still didn't answer my first question, the blonde brawler interjected annoyed. Crow sighed in exasperation before reluctantly continuing, It's hard to say. During the Battle of Beacon, you found Blake fighting her ex-partner, Adam Taurus, and tried to confront him. But you wind up losing your arm and your consciousness. The last time I saw you in the show was... He stopped, unsure of how to say it. Yang sensed his uncertainty and put a hand on his shoulder as she told him to just blurt it out and get it over with, like pulling off a band-aid. He inhaled deeply before finally saying, "You practically bit off Ruby's head for trying to cheer you up." The sounds of clockwork gears clicking were all that pervaded the room. Yang, herself, stared in disbelief before shaking her head as she thought, maybe asking what happened wasn't such a good idea after all. She looked down at the dichromatic young man as she said, "There's no way I'd ever do that," but the uncertainty in her voice was all the adults needed to know she was trying to fool herself. Dichro, however, could feel her own uncertainty and simply shook his head in a negative as he said, "Yang, don't lie to yourself like that. You know that you're just as liable to blow up at RWBY as you are your worst enemy. It was the situation you were put in that caused you to do so, though a situation that I wish to avert if at all possible." This eased the blonde brawler's mind somewhat, but the uncertainty still remained. Steeling herself, she made a silent vow, "I swear." She thought to herself, "I swear that I will not become that cold, not to RWBY, Dichro, or anyone else unless they deserve it." "There's even more," Ashbin finally spoke up, jarring the blonde brawler's thoughts from the prediction her bondmate gave her as he continued, "Do you believe in fairy tales?" "What, like Peekaboo with Fluffy Bunny or something?" she asked in return. This shocked Dichro, Ashbin, and Glinda as the latter professors looked at her uncle for an explanation. "Wait, Fluffy Bunny's actually a thing in Remnant?" The Aunt Faunus wondered in shock. Crow merely shrugged and said, "Taiyang was a little too overprotective, so I don't doubt that she won't know what you're talking about." With that, the headmaster nodded before turning back to Yang and asking, "Let me rephrase it, then. Do you know the legend of the Four Maidens?" "Yeah, not word for word," Dichro interrupted a confused Yang, who was going to ask what he was talking about, but long story short, there was an old man in the woods somewhere, I forget if anyone ever mentioned the place or not, who refused to leave his shack until one year he was visited by 4 women who came during their respective seasons, spring, summer, fall, and winter, coaxing and encouraging him to come outside and experience the world. When he does, he thanks the women by granting them a boon, their nature powers. That about sum it up? Ashbin stood stunned at the crass display towards their folklore and merely blinked a few times before simply saying, It's a rather butchered telling of the story. But it suffices. So let me get this straight." Yang interjected in a deadpan expression, "Dichro is from an entirely different world than Remnant, has seen the future of our world, and that these maidens all of you are talking about are real?" Said Aunt Faunus nodded as he replied curtly, "Yes. One possible future. And more than yes. In fact, there's one underneath the school right now." This little tidbit surprised Yang wholeheartedly as she tried to wrap her head around everything. "Okay. I have to say." The blonde brawler began as her expression became more exhausted looking. "I can kinda see why you kept all of that a secret, that's a bit of a headache. I need to sit down, or lay down." With that, the poor girl fell flat on her back though somehow still retained consciousness even after hitting the floor and saying, "One of the two, doesn't matter." "Well, you would have gotten nosy sooner or later," Dichro reasoned as he sat next to her on the floor. "Let's be honest, the bond would have made you suspicious of me if you kept feeling my guilt spike all of a sudden." Yang could only nod in understanding, but her bondmate wasn't done yet. "That aside, I also don't want any rifts between us. We're in this together until the end, Ibu." She chuckled with a small grin on her face as she looked over to him and nodded her appreciation. "Thanks," she said, uncharacteristically quiet. Dichro caught this and smiled as he said, "Just returning the favor, after all, you didn't have to unlock my aura." A cough caught the attention of both students' attention as they turned to the source. Crow gave the two a stern gaze as he spoke up, "While I don't want to interrupt such a tender moment, we still have bigger issues to deal with." He pointed at Dichro as he said his next part, like how you know who it was that attacked the Fall Maiden and how to deal with your training. "I'm afraid there's far more at stake than the identity of the Fall Maiden's attacker, Crow," Ashbin interrupted as he nodded to the young Aunt Faunus, who simply nodded back and pulled out the GGD as he and Yang stood up. "He's right, Mr. Crow. Daikro started as he held up the device. This device. It's a lot more dangerous than you think. Inside the gas adhere duel, or GGD, lies a virus that is more dangerous than all the Grimm in the world combined. As he explains what the Bugster virus is capable of, Yang's eyes widen in realization when she remembers her bondmate snapping at RWBY for even trying to touch the device. She knew he was trying to protect her, but she didn't realize just how dangerous the situation her half-sister was in really was until now. How I survived using it, I'm not sure to this day, but I do know this, only I can use it without it instantly killing me. That's not to say it won't do so later on. Daikro finished his exposition as he awaited the other two adults' replies. Glinda merely nodded in approval at understanding why he was so protective of it, but, as he took a swig of his flask, it was clear that Crow was annoyed at the concept of something more dangerous than the Grimm existing and made his opinion verbally known. I'm nowhere near drunk enough for this. The man said as he recapped his flask, listen, the only reason I'm even here is to train you, and to do that, I need to know what you're capable of as a huntsman. So you're willing to take on the task? Ashvin queried as he donned a soft smirk on his face. Crow simply stared at the headmaster with a quirked eyebrow and asked, after hearing all of that the kid has to go through? He'll be lucky if my training will help him at all. Besides, I still need to see what he's able to do on his own before taking him under my wing. Glinda shook her head before turning to look at Daikro as she said, I'm afraid it won't be much. He's been trained in a rather intense version of Taiyang style called kickboxing, which is essentially unarmed combat. What's more is he just recently got his weapons today and said that they are still incomplete though. All the more reason we need him to start using his weapons now. The more options he has to fight with, the better, Crow explained as he walked over to Daikro and put a hand on the Ant Fauna's head, being that his shoulder was too short to reach, as he said, see ya outside in a few minutes. I've had enough exposition for one afternoon. With that, he walked into the elevator and rode it down to the bottom floor. First person POV dash. I watched as the dusty old crow left the office in concern, knowing full well that I was in for a hell of a time. Turning back to Ashvin, I nodded at the headmaster before saying, if that's all, I think I'll go ahead and leave. Calling out Yang's name, I turned my attention to her and offered, if you want, Yang, you can go do whatever you want to get your mind off of this. She hesitated as she opened her mouth to speak before finally allowing the words to form, I'm actually going to just follow you around. It'd help me out if I did, anyway. I simply nodded with a small smile before turning towards the elevator. Outside Beacon Tower dash. It didn't take long to reach the tower entrance and leap through the doors when we both noticed Blake walking up to us, or more specifically, me. She waved as she greeted us, hey, Daikro, Yang. I was coming here to see if I could find you, but looks like that wasn't really needed. Turns out Weiss and I both had one ribbon each to spare. As she handed a pair of ribbons, one black and one white, I smiled as I realized my luck just barely got better. Taking the offered ribbons and unhooking Plague from my belt loop, I wrapped the black ribbon around the shaft a few times before tying it in a knot. With that done, I tied the other end of the ribbon around my left wrist before clipping Plague back to my belt loop and repeating the process with Pestilence and the white ribbon. With both weapons secured, I looked up to see Yang giving me a perplexed look as Blake had intrigue on her face. That's an interesting way of fighting. Blake noted as she had watched me doing all that work. Wouldn't bracers work better for keeping the ribbon secured, though? And not to mention a latch of some kind to keep the ribbon secured to your weapons. I simply shrugged, saying that if I could get those done, I would, which wasn't a lie. I had every intention of finding something a little more removable for me to use on my weapons, but with no lien and already in debt, as far as I could tell at least, there wasn't much I could do. Besides, I began to explain, I've got a training exercise to get to soon. Blake nodded in understanding before wishing me good luck as she left, with me barely getting a chance to thank her for the ribbon and to tell Weiss I said thanks as well. I looked around and found Crow waiting by an open area leaning on a lamppost with his arms crossed. I walked over to him with Yang following behind me as I waved at him. His only reaction was to stare at me with a raised eyebrow and only spoke when I was within earshot. Well, took you long enough. Let's get this going, then. This will be a spar between you and me. I cringed slightly at the thought of having to fight Crow Branwen himself. He must have noticed this because he shook his head and said, don't worry, I'll keep my weapon in its sword form, just try not to be too tense or else. Air. Why do you have ribbons on your wrists? I merely unclipped Plague and Pestilence from my belt loops and held them aloft, showing the other ends of the ribbons, which caused Crow to smirk. Oh, that's why, he stated as he drew his weapon and turned it into its sword form. Now then. Ready when you are. I am so not ready. I thought to myself in dismal depression, but here goes. I slammed the blades of the axes together a few times before I stood with my legs slightly spread apart, my left in front of my right, as I held my weapons up close to my chest while my right foot was only touching the ground with the toes. As I got ready to fight, Crow was already dashing towards me, his sword drawn back for a slash, but he simply went past me to my right and stopped just behind me. As I turned and tried to block with Pestilence, he made an upward slash at my back that connected and caused me to stumble slightly forward in pain before he moved to a downward horizontal slash at my front. His speed nearly prevented me from blocking, but it was only by the grace of luck that Plague happened to be in place that stopped the strike from connecting. I swatted the sword away with Pestilence before I threw Plague at him, without using much of my strength, with a vertical toss, to which he dodged by jumping into the air. I grabbed the ribbon before it gained too much slack and flung it up at him from his left. He blocked the strike effortlessly as Plague struck his sword instead of his side. I looped the tomahawk around before bringing it down on him as quickly as I could, but he deflects it to his right this time. Before it could hit the ground, and as Crow landed, I pulled on the ribbon and tried to bring it back to my hand. This, however, did not happen. As luck would have it, it smacked me in the left eye with its shaft. God damn it! I cried out in aggravation as I covered my left eye. I didn't even notice Plague landing on the ground next to me until I started looking for it. You have trouble dealing with naturally quick opponents, I take it? Crow asked as he walked up to me while I picked up Plague. I merely looked up at him, with my left eye still closed, and shrugged as I said, hardly dealt with any to begin with. Doubt I'd last long against RWBY, to be honest. With that, he nodded before rushing up to me with his sword following alongside him before slashing diagonally from his left. I barely bring up my weapons in time to block the attack, yet this time he didn't just go straight into another attack. Instead, he started to push against me as he said, "Then let's see how you do against someone your own speed." So he was holding his speed back in favor of trying to overpower me. In hindsight, this was a mistake on his part. With little effort, I literally fling him off my weapons, causing him to stumble quite a bit, before I flung Pestilence at him. Just as he dodges with a side hop, I flung Plague at him from the side while simultaneously pulling Pestilence back towards me. He ducks the attack, dodging it just as easily as he did the first, but my assault continued, neither weapon returning to my hand as I continuously fling both tomahawks at him as if they were makeshift boxing gloves, yet not a single attack hits as he continuously dodges me. I soon gave up and pulled both weapons back until only a single foot of ribbon was left before I started to spin them around, Plague being spun counterclockwise while Pestilence was spun clockwise. The speed at which they spun rapidly began to increase until all I could see were blurs similar to copter blades. Add to that a whistling sound I could hear and it made me think for a moment I was wielding some mystical artifacts or something. I soon let go of both weapons, not knowing exactly where they would go but hoping they would at least go for my target. They shot skyward and dragged me up several feet with them. Oh crap baskets. I mentally cursed myself, I'm an idiot. I did something that, at first, seemed like the dumbest idea ever and curled into a ball. That action unintentionally brought Plague and Pestilence down upon where Crow was standing and actually managed to destroy huge chunks of concrete as the intended target narrowly dodged out of the way. I soon crashed onto the ground on my back, bouncing a few times, before finding myself facing a rather pleased Crow. "Nice moves there, amateur," he said with a chuckle and a smirk as he helped me up. While I was reeling my weapons in, I noticed the damage I had caused and turned pale out of fear and hastened my efforts to retract my weapons. This didn't last long though as Crow put a hand on my shoulder and said, "Don't worry about the damage. We'll just say I did it." He smirked once more and said, "You've got potential to be a long-range powerhouse with those weapons of yours. Problem is, you lack the precision and coordination necessary to make full use of them, at least for now." I nodded at his words as I rubbed my left eye once more, looking at Yang and opening it when I knew Crow wasn't able to see. Channeling my concern for it through our bond, she nodded with a smile that I reciprocated as I made one final rub before turning to her uncle. That said. There's the but. You need to also learn to use your weapon's other forms if it has any. He finished as he looked at Pestilence before asking, any reason why you didn't transform them? No ammo, was all I said. At this, Crow's face met concrete sidewalk in a facefault. As he recovered, he rubbed his head and sat up before asking, you're joking, right? What kind of idiot doesn't carry ammo? The kind of idiot that just made their weapons today. I looked in the direction the retort came from and found the source of it was the very person I had tried to avoid for most of the day, a teenage girl with fair skin, short dark brown hair with wavy locks on one side of her face, dyed with a gradient that starts in dark brown and transitions to caramel, and dark brown eyes. Unlike her teammates, she wasn't wearing her beacon uniform. Instead, she opted to wear her long, cocoa-colored shirt with a dark brown waist cincher, long, dark brown trousers with ribbons on the left side and a brown belt with bullets, a crap ton of accessories I couldn't even name, black aviator shades, and her dark brown beret. There was no way I was getting out of this confrontation this time. Coco Adele had laid her eyes on me, and she wasn't going to stop until she got her kill. Chapter 17, Fashion Senseless? First person POV dash. A few days had passed since my unannounced guest arrived and made such a scene. As angry as I was for his appearance causing the deaths of two of my followers, I had to admit that his reason for their deaths was amicably reasonable. Due to the nature of what he dubbed as a gas hat, the volatile energies would have just as likely hit my children and myself as it had with Tyrion and Arthur. Now that I have had the time to muddle my thoughts together, it really does seem like it could have just as easily hurt me as it had them, though I refuse to openly admit it out loud, let alone in the audience of this thing. Yes. Unfortunately, thing is the only way I can truly describe the being in front of me, especially as he continues to inspect my precious children one by one as his grin grows wider. Fascinating. He spoke as he draws a hand over the Beowulf's lower jaw. Despite its best attempts, my child's bites refuse to connect with the thing's flesh as it phases completely through with the man never flinching even once, a biological phenomenon that disassaults the instant of its death as a means of rapid decayment. And its sole XX existence is to kill humans, did you say? I merely nodded before explaining how they did not require nourishment nor sleep, which only further heightened his curiosity. Fascinating, he said before turning to me and asking, might I be inclined as to request to try to XX experiment meant on these? Grim? How do you propose to do that which no human or faunus has ever done? I retorted as I glared at him with my arms crossed. His smile only grew as he replied, why? I wish to mama make a Grim of my own, of course. My eyes widened in shock at this declaration. This creature was stupid enough to willingly wander to the birthing pools and openly experiment on the very essence that gives my children life, my own blood? I glared at him and openly voiced my opinion on the matter, but nothing I said would dissuade him. Instead, he retorts, the reason I wish to do so is from OB observations. What I can surmise, Mac making a Grim should be no DD different than making a new Gamgee game. As he said this, he waved a hand at the Beowulf he was inspecting, with some strange orange dust appearing from his fingertips and covering the young Grim's snout before vanishing and causing the youngling to flinch and convulse in pain. With a snap of his fingers, the Beowulf suddenly turned into that same orange dust in an instant, with that dust condensing into his palm. As the dust took on the form of a miniaturized version of the Grim he just destroyed, it was clear to me that he would do as he wished regardless of my wishes. With much reluctance and abhorrence, I lead him to the birthing pools of my children. Meanwhile dash. Beacon Academy dash. Dicros POV dash. Looks like this is it, the confrontation I never wanted. I don't know how long I actually stared her down, but it felt like hours before Coco finally spoke up and said in that overly confident tone of hers, you have some nerve to just up and leave my team in the lurch like that. Do you have any idea how worried they were when you up and left like that? I furrowed my brow as I continued to glare at her before turning away and walking towards Young. I didn't even take 3 steps when I felt a hand grabbing my shoulder in a tight grip. Hey, Coco called out, I'm talking to you, so the least you can do is listen. Why should I give you the same privilege you've never shown anyone else? I quickly shot back at her. This seemed to catch her by surprise as the grip on my shoulder nearly all but vanished. I took this chance and grabbed her wrist before flinging her hand off me like I was throwing away trash and resumed walking. "What are you talking about?" she asked. "You don't even know me, so don't act like you do." I merely glanced back at her before stating, "I don't have to know you. I can tell who you are just by how you're acting right now. You're too confident for your own good. You think you are above reproach, that you can do no wrong in your eyes. Let me put that to rest. No one is above their consequences. Anything you say or do can hurt not only yourself but others as well." That was a bit of a lie because, to some degree, I did know her and by the gods I hated her. She's that one character that just oozes confidence to the point of being obnoxious. There's being sure of yourself, like Yang was before that incident. And then there's being cocky, Exhibit A being Coco here and Exhibit B being Carden Winchester, the jerk. How can you even say that, Dicro? Yang asked as she walked up to me. At least give her a chance to defend herself first before you go making claims like that. I rolled my eyes at the notion and was about to tell her that I would refuse to listen to anything she would have to say, when Coco, herself, said something completely out of character. "Am I really that easy to read?" she asked in a genuinely concerned tone. I flinched a little at the tone but retained my stern look as I turned to her and merely nodded. She sighed before she took off her shades and looked at me like she had walked out of a funeral before she spoke up. "Look, I think we just got off on the wrong foot. I didn't mean to come off as someone so aggressive that you take offense to it. I just really care about my team. Seeing them get so used to someone that quickly was a shock. I mean, sure, they're a friendly bunch, but Velvet's the most shy person I know, and here you come and she's practically throwing herself at you." Oh dear God, I shouldn't have read between those lines. I felt the heat rushing to my face in embarrassment at the thought, but Coco wasn't finished when you up and left just as I came in. I saw how hurt all of them were, even that blonde kid. They thought they did something wrong. Okay, that one kinda stung a little. I know what it feels like to blame yourself for something going wrong. But even so I held my ground as Coco continued. "I only came to find out why you did that, but I should have known it had something to do with me. So I'm not asking you to be BFFs with me or anything. All I ask is that we at least try to tolerate each other. For Team CFBY's sake." "What I say?" She held a hand out in a gesture to shake, but I simply swayed my head left and right as I said, "Sorry, but that's not going to cut it. If I do this, then Bun Bun will owe me a huge favor." This got her on high alert as she glared at me in anger and hostility before asking through gritted teeth, "Just what kind of sick, perverted little scheme do you think you're going to make Velvet do?" I simply smirked before shrugging my shoulders as I answered, "Sorry, but it's not what I'm going to make her do. It's what I'm going to make her not do." This got the reaction I was hoping for as she clenched her fists and tensed up ready to strike me at a moment's notice. "Then what, pray tell, is it you're going to make her not do then?" she asked, once more through gritted teeth. My grin only got wider as I looked at her with my right eye closed before wagging my left index finger at her and saying, "Lil Bun Bun's not allowed to take pictures of my weapons anymore, capiche?" Hey, Aowan face meets concrete once more, though I could feel Yang's shock and heard her hitting the ground along with Coco and Crow. Coco was the first to recover as she outright yelled, "In my face, you little snot-nosed brat, I thought you were gonna take advantage of Velvet or something." I laughed at her reaction before saying, "Not my fault your mind went into the gutter," and resuming my laughter which became heartier as her face turned crimson at this. Her cheeks were puffing up but before long, she looked like she was struggling to keep something inside her mouth. After a few seconds, I found out what that something was. Laughter. She looked like she couldn't help herself any longer as she laughed with me. "You have got to be the weirdest little squirt I've ever met," she said with her still red face beaming in a smile. "It's been ages since I let someone get the better of me like that for enjoyment's sake." Ha ha. "You know what, I take back what I said earlier, you're alright for a trickster." I simply grinned before saying, "Yeah, but I've got a lot to show you about how I work. I mean, really, it's so much that Affogato make lists about it." That got her laughing harder and Young to join in, yet Crow groaned before whispering something I couldn't make out over the laughter. "Oh sweet dust, you're killing me." Coco laughed out as she clutched her sides. I simply turned to Yang and called out, "Hey, Yang, better fetch the coffee in before she bites it." This got both of them to laugh harder before the poor fashionista grabbed my shoulder and pleaded between laughs, "No more, please stop." I simply smirked and patted her back before apologizing. "What in Am's name are you apologizing for?" she asked, her laughter finally calming down some as she continued to speak. "No wonder they liked you so much." I simply nodded before taking on a more serious expression. "I was serious, you know, I started out about you having that vibe of superiority and how I hated that kind of thing. If you can dial that confidence back to what you had it just now, I think we can work to some kind of an agreement." And I meant that, too. Seeing her actually act like a normal human instead of someone who thought she was better than anyone because of how she looked and what she can do was literally the last thing I expected to see her doing. She needs her confidence shaken in order for her to make it out of what's to come. She simply smiled and nodded as she said, "Yeah, I get it. I'll tone it down if you let me buy you a new outfit at least." I sulked at the thought of going shopping again. Yang groaned before muttering a quick nod again, which Coco and Crow caught on to. Team CFBY's leader was the one that asked what she meant by that, to which I answered that both teams RWBY and JNPR tried every store they could think of with none of them selling anything even remotely decent without looking completely childish or treating me like a little kid. As she heard this, Coco grinned at me and said, "Then you haven't been to the right store, then?" Oh no. There's that cocky attitude again. Without another word, she quickly grabbed me by the arm and started to drag me off to the bullhead court, leaving a stunned Yang and Crow behind, might I add. Later that day dash. Vale City dash. Okay. This was not what I was expecting. To be honest, I had next to no idea what I was expecting when she started to describe it in full, but whatever it was, this wasn't it. When I went clothes shopping with the teams, we literally went to every big, brand-name clothing store they could think of, which made me start to think that they knew a few too many places to go shopping. But this place, it was actually a little on the rundown side, if I was honest. The actual building had some hairline cracks on the walls and pillars, barely noticeable unless you were right in front of the store like I was, but still there nonetheless. The aforementioned pillars were along the corners of the building and lining the frame of the front doors. Above the doors was a sort of balcony with letters that spelled out the store's name, and what an odd name it was. Pins Point Precision Fashion. I read aloud trying to understand it and compare it to everything else I've seen in Remnant. That makes no sense. I thought we named our kids after colors, so what gives? Coco simply chuckled at my confusion as she answered, "He, that's the owner's last name. This place was actually his grandfather's before his dad inherited it and then he inherited it from him. His first name is actually Robert, but I tend to call my cousin Bobby Dot." I muddled the name around before I finally figured it out. Bobby. Pin? I asked, which got a nod from Coco. That got me slapping my face in disgust. It was so simple I overlooked it. Bobby pins tend to be black and it falls in line with his love of fashion and clothing, she explained before walking to and opening one of the doors, holding it open as she motioned for me to enter first saying, "After you." I didn't want to sound macho or like I was trying to be sexist, but I couldn't help but think, aren't I supposed to be doing that for her? I shrugged at the thought and just walked in. The place looked more like a refurbished old movie theater than it did a clothing store. Everywhere I looked, I saw maroon velvet carpeting and golden brown walls. The actual stands that held the clothing were simple hanger stands that held all kinds of different styles of dresses and suits, from the barrenly simple to the exaggeratedly extravagant and every nook and cranny in between. There were also wooden shelves that held different articles of clothing from shirts to socks to pants and even underwear. I had to double take as I noticed a pair of lace-frilled black boxers. Seriously? I asked aloud as I motioned to them. "Don't ask, it's complicated to explain either side of that," was all she said as she continued to walk through the store as I followed her. We soon reached a bar-esque stand with a cash register and some displays of different kinds of accessories on the wall behind it. On either side of the stand were display stands of different types of shades, glasses, bracelets, and even little knickknacks, like bobbleheads. I could hear something rustling behind the bar as if moving stuff around before a somewhat masculine voice harshly whispered, "Damn it, I know I had that damn pearl polish kit around here somewhere." You know your mother would throw a fit if she heard that come out of your mouth, Bobby, Coco said suddenly, shocking the poor man into hitting his head on the bar itself. As he bolted up from under the bar, I noticed that his straight as a nail chocolate brown hair reached down to his knees. He also wore a tickle-me pink dress shirt with black dress pants and a black tuxedo vest with multiple tailor items hanging from it like tape measures, pin cushions, scissors his upper left chest pocket, and spools of thread in all the other pockets. On his face was a pair of rectangular, wire-frame spectacles with a chain to keep the glasses from falling off him completely. I have to say, I thought to myself, this guy definitely fits in with the theme around here. Oh, if it isn't my favorite baby cousin and customer. He cried out in what I presume was excitement as he rushed around the bar and pulled Coco into a spinning hug. She chuckled rather awkwardly as she said, "Yeah, it's me, and please don't do that again." "And what, treat you like I do my other customers?" Bobby retorted as he waggled his eyebrows. I felt a shiver run down my spine as he did that. If he treats his cousin like this, then how does he treat his customers? About that. She began as she motioned to me, "He's going to be your newest customer. Though if what I heard from Velvet is true, then I'll be giving him some lean to pay you for it." At this, the man raised an eyebrow in confusion as he asked what she heard. To be honest, I was interested in this too. Turns out, Velvet got a hold of RWBY and managed to pry out the cover story about how I was kidnapped from outside the kingdoms and dumped into the Emerald Forest I had given to Young, who then gave it to Blake, who then shared it with the rest of Team RWBY and Team JNPR. And I call it a cover story because I still have no godly idea how I even got here in the first place. When he heard this, he made an exaggerated gasp of shock before exclaiming, "And you were going to try and pay for his clothes and leave yourself in the lurch?" "I don't think so. His entire first wardrobe will be on the house, and no exceptions." Coco's shades slanted on her face as she looked at her cousin in shock, a sentiment I shared that was way too generous, and I tried to explain, but he kept butting and saying, "No exceptions, I told you." He took out his tape measure and started taking measurements of me right where I stood, despite my protests, and jotted down what he found on a notepad he pulled out of his vest. How long he kept at this, I don't think I will ever know. When he was done, however, he nodded and simply put the notepad back into his vest and started to pace before grabbing a bunch of random, at least to me, articles of clothing from different parts of the store. He eventually got it all and shoved them into my arms. "There you go," he said. "This should help you out, darling, until I can actually custom make your clothes. Trust me, these will pale in comparison to what I have in store." "Yeesh, you sound like you live for this kind of work even after clothing time," I joked with a smile. Coco giggled at the joke, but Bobby, well, he either ignored it and didn't show it, or he completely missed it by a mile, because his reply was, "It's closing time, not clothing time, mister." "Dicro," I answered for him, and to be honest, I was only besting with you. I mean, what kind of guy would I be if I didn't know how to make fashionable jokes? Coco started making this like cross between a choke and a chuckle for some reason, with Bobby's confusion only growing. "Now you've completely lost me," he said, no sense of humor at all. "He's a pun lover, Bobby," Coco said as she started to laugh. He looked at his cousin like she grew a second head, and I snickered as the thought hit me. Oh god, this guy's never heard of puns? Seriously? Dude, you have got to get out more. I pointed out as I walked to the front door when I suddenly heard some shouting outside. "What the hell?" I whispered as I dropped the clothes in my arms and ran outside to see a nearby dust shop being robbed by a bunch of people wearing black suits with white armor and white masks. Lead by a girl with pink and chocolate brown hair with white stripes along the pink hat. Ah, crap baskets. I thought to myself, things just got a lot more difficult. To be continued.